You're here with Zach.
I'm Blair.
And Brody.
And today's topic is exclusion in nerd culture. Guys, why don't nerds want to hang out with me?
I mean...
Because you called them nerds for one.
Shit! First of all, nerd and geek culture, is that different? Like, do you guys make a different... Do you differentiate the two?
I feel like some people do. I do sometimes. It kind of depends on who I'm talking to, though.
What do you identify as? Or what has the stigma to you? Does one have a stigma over the other?
Nerd feels like it has the stigma only because of films from the 80s.
It's Revenge of the Nerds.
Like Revenge of the Nerds.
Yeah.
Right? Like, nerd has a stereotype to it when geek sounds cooler, almost. You know?
Really? I always thought it was the opposite. Like, I don't really bother to differentiate it now, but when I did, I always pictured like a geek in my head was like taped glasses, fanny pack, pocket protector.
Hey, there's nothing bad about fanny packs.
I think the world is against you on that. But
Yeah, I think
have
Brody's
one.
fighting a
I
one-man
have
fight
a
against the
fanny
pick. Brody and all tourists everywhere are fighting.
I would take...
It's super useful.
No, I don't agree, because I would take a small bag. Like, I have my shoulder
I would
bag,
carry like a Merce before I fanny pack.
Nothing
I
I would
like
ever
Merces,
want to
too.
carry around with me fits in that thing. Like, you can't fit a book in it.
Well, I use it for work.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I use an
Like,
apron at work,
But like
so...
keys and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And
Like what I was saying, geeks are like you think like I would push that kid into a locker, and nerds are still I would push him into a little locker, but like wear the My Little Pony t-shirt, wear the superhero t-shirts, probably have a neck beard.
See, that's
are
the other thing
are
for
into
me.
like the video game and the superhero culture, whereas like geeks are like math.
See, it's I associate those words completely oppositely.
Really?
Like nerds are smart and into studying and math and that kind of thing, and then geeks are into superhero culture, comic books, you know.
has anyone ever
That
come
kind of
out
thing.
and like tried to make the official differentiate like
Someone
like,
call Webster's and just make them
Yeah,
take a
like,
hard stance
hey
on this
Webster's, and then like Webster's spends thousands of dollars of research money going over like pop culture and being like, all right, but which one is which?
What is what?
And then like you can get to that point where radio stations are fined for using geek and nerd
Yeah.
incorrectly.
Well, I mean, I've definitely had conversations and even arguments about like people calling me a geek or a nerd, or me calling somebody else a geek or a nerd, and like somebody getting offended depending on the word and depending on the person.
one. Really? I thought we were to the point where like both geekdom and nerddom was cool.
It depends on
Which is-
it always depends on the person, right?
Yeah,
It's like
it depends on like who's using the.
I
I like nerd over geek just physically how the word tastes, like how it comes.
Okay.
out. No,
I was
seriously,
agreeing with
geek,
you.
Geek is too harsh for me. I like nerd how like it's weird. I sometimes have that where certain words feel better, so I'm like, if there's really no difference, that's what I'm
nerd
gonna
feels
go with.
too soft though.
Yeah, but it's like why do I need to like. I don't know. I guess it's
I also think geek culture sounds better than nerd culture.
that's true, but maybe
It has
I,
a better
that is
flow.
true.
But I'm against the idea of like geek culture.
Also,
and
calling
nerd
someone a
culture.
nerd is way more fun than calling someone a geek.
Exactly, it's a better insult. You
Yeah.
nerd.
So
Yeah.
all right, now I'm confused. I'm confused where we're. I suggested the topic just because I think there's a lot to talk about. I think
Right.
whether or not it's geek or nerd culture, there is a culture. There is a culture out there.
And it's exclusive.
Of either of those, and I find it's personally kind of exclusive. I think I've been to like comic book shops and I was with someone, and they picked up a comic book going like, oh, Sin City is a comic book, and some guy like 2 rows down just sneered loudly. Like, I'm like, okay, first of all, why does it matter? Like, why does it matter so much that you have to like make a person feel really bad about not knowing? Like, I don't know. But that's not like to put it on the whole broad situation. It was just one situation I had where I'm like, you're owning this way too much. Like, you're possessive of this way too much.
Yeah. Well, I think that situation describes it like almost perfectly though, right? Because it's weird. Because of the stigma of being a geek or a nerd for so long has like really hit people in here. When people come in and try to like take a part in their culture, they don't like that. Like they start to feel exclusive because it is theirs.
You're saying they. It's also a we thing.
Yes,
do it.
no, I know.
do it.
I know.
And like I catch myself doing this sort of thing where I'm like, oh, you totally don't get all the stuff that I know about this.
Right.
And I'm very defensive about that. But I'm also not calling someone like, I'm not calling people names on the internet or anything. I'm just, I sometimes check myself because I'm like either frustrated that they're not getting something that I've known for so long. Like you play D&D with people who are now just getting into D&D, and sometimes you're frustrated with like, come on, this should not take you this long.
Why don't you get that? Right?
How do you
It's
not
so
understand
simple.
the concept of armor class versus like attack bonus? Come on.
Yeah.
What? You'd rather use Thaco? Get out of here.
But
Don't you shit talk Thaco.
But I haven't come to a point where it's like if someone is showing an interest in something that I have an interest in, I don't feel like overly possessive of it that I put down their interest for being at a very young point, right?
I don't know. It's just, I think the biggest part of it is, like I said, I genuinely thought we were all okay with this and we were moving along. And everyone was, we're all nerds. We all love superhero movies. Yo, you see Avengers? I saw Avengers. It was sweet. Got me into reading comics. We're golden. No. Nerds looked at that and they were furious.
It's so weird because nerds are simultaneously excited about superhero films and miserable about them because it brought in this whole new group of people enjoying superheroes. But you have everybody who has been reading comics for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 80 years.
80 years.
80 years. 80 years comics.
You don't know.
Pre-Stan Lee.
Exactly. Does he
No.
even read comics? It doesn't matter. It's like people who have been reading comics and now all these other people are watching superhero films and getting into comics. It's kind of like they don't want to share. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, these are my toys. I'm going to play with them. You had your cars and your footballs. Why don't you just keep playing with those and leave my toys alone? It's that kind of weird juvenile mentality.
I don't want to share. No, totally.
And it's also kind of become like the keys to the castle, like the keys to the high castle sort of thing, where it's like in Age of Ultron, like there's the Wakanda reference that unless you've read X amount of comic books or even like watched a good amount of the cartoons, because I know some of the Avengers cartoons like featured Wakanda, like you're not gonna get that reference. Also, it has very little to do with the story. Like, there's a lot of the Easter eggs have taken front and center now. Stuff that used to be Easter eggs, like seeing the Cap's shield in Iron Man.
Yeah,
or Bucky holding Cap's shield in his right arm and
what?
Cap 1.
No, you can't do that sort of thing. You're gonna potentially spoil stuff.
Okay.
Oh,
no, we'll save that for another time.
Yeah, well,
we're not gonna talk about spoilers.
But it's stopped being so much about Easter eggs. But then it's like, hey, this is content that we have. Remember it for you guys who know this.
Exactly. It's like, here, look, we're making this movie for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And even then, exactly. It's just like nothing feels worse than when you're in a movie theater, and it's happened when I've went to see superhero movies because. Yeah, sure, I'm decently well-read in comics, but I'm not amazing. So sometimes I'll be, like, in a theater, and there's a joke that some nerds get. Or not even nerds, people who enjoy comics. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm like, okay.
It's like you almost feel like the loser at that
yeah,
point.
you're excluded going to, like, sitting into, like, a theater with a bunch of people sharing the same, like, entertainment as you.
Yeah.
But everyone else is laughing at, like, the Wakanda reference, or like I remember distinctly the Captain America moment that I mentioned. You and me lost our shit.
Yeah, we were super excited.
Yeah, and everyone else we were with were just like, okay,
okay, he's shield.
Yeah,
he's using his weapon as a weapon.
Ooh,
yeah,
look at him go.
Did you guys ever have moments where like you've brought someone into like a comic book movie and they're like, you got a reference and like you make a note of it,
you're like,
or you say,
did you
and
see?
They're like, oh, what is that? And then it's not like you're mad, like you're like, how do you explain that? Like there's so much there that it's like,
you have to explain so much backstory and explain so many things. Like even with Jessica Jones, to get recent with things that we're talking about.
Let's get recent with things.
One of the minor characters. I won't get into too spoilers, but one of the minor characters is Nuke, who's a very like D-list villain.
Yeah.
Try and explain Nuke to your girlfriend who's barely read any comics.
I've only read one comic with Nuke in it.
Exactly.
But it makes...
Was it House of M or something like that, where he's
No.
barely in it?
No,
well,
it was in a
the thing with
Daredevil
that is,
comic.
who's
Okay.
even gonna care at that point?
Exactly.
It's like
I had trouble figuring out who he
I didn't know
was.
who Nuke was.
Yeah, she actually looked it up. She's like, "It's Nuke," and I'm like, "Oh, I know who Nuke is." She's like, "Cool, I don't."
I didn't.
Oh yeah.
I didn't even. I looked it up afterwards, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this guy's supposed to be Nuke." I was like, "Who the hell?"
Yeah, no, I've only read him in one Daredevil
Yeah.
comic, and it was just, yeah. No, even like with the Infinity Stones, like people are like,
Oh
like
my
I've had
God.
people ask me stuff because they're like, Blair, you read comics? I'm like, I kind of
Yeah.
read comics. It's like, okay, well, what's the story with the Infinity Stones? I'm like,
It's like, why should we care kind
Yeah.
of thing, right? And
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
you're like, if I explain it to you, you're gonna fall asleep halfway through, not care, or stop watching
Yeah.
superhero movies altogether.
So
because it's like-
definitely a part of it is definitely the whole I don't want to share what, like, this is my toy, but it's also
Yeah.
just like, holy crap, I have to explain so much backstory to really explain
Yeah.
the importance of like this one thing. Like the Infinity Stones are just
let me flip it into a different perspective, because recently my brother-in-law, huge hockey fan,
Yeah.
he watches hockey constantly, and so many people, like, you can't go anywhere, work anywhere without hearing people talking about sports.
yeah.
As somebody who grew up seeing sports around him but never being interested in it ever, I'm now trying to get into it, and it's kind of the same thing. Like, somebody's talking about a player, and I'm like, oh, like, why is that player important? And they either scoff or laugh at me, or just say, or give me a brief explanation. Those are people that are actually nice to talk to.
Yeah.
Or they're just like, you know what, don't worry about it, just he's good. And I'm like, okay, well, you're not making this very easy to want to sit down and watch hockey with you or anything, because it's hard to care at that point.
That brings me to something else I wanted to talk about, and that's the for lack of a better term, there is a better term, I just want to say this.
oh, you
The
just
dick-
wanted to say lack of better term.
Yeah.
Okay.
The dick measuring that's in nerd culture as well is like everyone,
Yeah.
every nerd has had that just top time where you're just like delving into your obscure comic book knowledge to try. We just talked about Nuke. Who the hell is Nuke?
Yeah, seriously.
Like,
Yeah, look
everyone's-
how cool we are, 'cause
Yeah.
we know who Nuke is. And
Yeah.
you probably don't. No, you guys might.
But exactly
I
that.
didn't, so.
Everyone's had that conversation where you're just kind of, whether you're aware of it or not, you're kind of trying to one up each other to bring
Yeah.
like these obscure characters or like the obscure plot lines. Like remember that time Spider-Man gave birth to himself? That was weird.
You
am I
always
right?
want to show off how knowledgeable you are to other people.
Yeah, and I think these little dick measuring competitions that you get into is a way of reaffirming that you're not wasting your time. That this hobby isn't a waste of time. You're like, look, I know enough. I've spent so much time on this. I have been studying this, learning this, like delving into it. I know more than you.
Yeah.
I am knowledgeable of the topic. This is something I am good at because I've spent time on it, and it is a reaffirmation of that.
But that's the problem. It's like, if you're going to make it that way, and you're going to be so or if you're going to be so self-serving in your fandom of something, and then you're putting others down who are in a position who they may not know as much, they're getting into it, and then here you are going in and saying like, oh, you don't know as much as me, and potentially turning them off, like potentially being like, oh, I don't want to associate myself with someone who, hey, I might like this intellectual property, this show or something, but if the people who I'm talking to who are in my vicinity who I can potentially talk to about this don't want to talk to me in any terms that I find enjoyable, maybe I'll just stop watching it. Because like, that's a huge part of why we watch shows and stuff is sharing our interpretations of stuff.
Yeah, sharing your experiences with that show.
Yeah, it's like we have so much opportunity to talk to people about our stuff and what we enjoy, and yet we're still using the majority of that to tell each other that we're stupid and wrong. Like,
No, we're not stupid and wrong. They're stupid and wrong.
Well, everyone's stupid
Everyone's
and wrong. Like, you
stupid,
cannot,
except for
sometimes you
myself.
cannot win on the internet. Instead of being like, hey, let's enjoy stuff together and like have a discussion. It's not discussions, it's screaming into the void. It's like, it's madness.
Yeah.
And what's happening is we're also interacting on personal levels the way we interact with the anonymity of the internet. It's, hey, you don't like this, you're stupid, I'm better than you. Like, I've had a lot of those conversations, and I'm like, you haven't taken the time to ask me what I know about this stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and that's just a whole nother thing of people loving to just talk about themselves and talk about what they know and not
Yeah.
be interested in what other people
That's
are
a whole
thinking.
nother beast.
That's a
well, I
beast.
don't think it's a whole nother. I think it's
Yeah.
so integral to
Yeah.
what this is
Yes.
that like
Yeah.
it has to be like spoken about.
Yeah.
Like it's called like fan. It's called being a fan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're all like supposed to be rejoicing in the celebration of this thing. Like, music fans, I don't know what music fans are like anymore because I've stopped kind of paying attention to music on the internet. Pretty much my only reference for it is like movies like Almost Famous, where everyone's like, I love this band, I love this
Almost
band
Famous
too.
came out more than 15 years ago.
You guys get on me for talking about dated shit.
No,
This
but
guy's
you know,
bringing up
you know what I
Almost
mean.
Famous.
It's not quite. I'm not quite only going off Almost Famous,
No.
but like it's like I'm watching so many movies and that's everything, right? It's like these whole like fans being like big. I don't know.
Well, it becomes based on genre at that point.
Yeah.
With music and movies
Cameron Crowe.
and Cameron Crowe.
I don't think the exclusivity is subject to only the nerd culture, because you brought up music fans. Holy
Yeah.
crap, is that a nightmare?
I feel like we should go on the record and say this is more about fandom exclusivity in general,
yeah,
and not
with a
just nerd.
focus on nerd
Yeah.
culture.
People are
because-
shitty.
Yeah,
Everybody
everyone is an
shitty.
asshole.
Okay, no, but back to the whole, this is my thing, I don't want to share it. It's still a culture for a reason. It's still a coming together of people to talk about. It's still a fandom. There's still, it wouldn't be a culture or community or whatever if everyone hated everyone. It's definitely there. People still talk about it, and I think a big part of it is a bond through suffering or something like that. Not so much suffering, but for the longest time, and I think the biggest argument that a lot of people had, especially with how pissed off some people are with like people being able to watch the Batman movie and call themselves a nerd. I personally don't care, but I know a lot of people are really about it.
Oh, look at me, I'm such a nerd.
Yeah,
Kind of thing.
I don't want to get into that because I think you can call yourself a nerd for whatever you want because it's an arbitrary phrase.
We have friends that are into Formula One. They're a racing nerd.
Yeah.
Like, you can be a nerd about anything.
Yeah.
I think the thing is a lot of people are upset because there's this whole new pop culture accessibility to it, in which when people have been working so hard for it, like you're
to
kind
hold on to it, right?
Yeah.
It's like I put in, you were mentioning that, is like I put in so many hours, and then someone can come in and all they have to do is watch X, and X, like
And now they're an expert.
yeah.
It's
Kind of thing, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a like misappropriated labor of love, I guess would be the best way of putting it. It's something that you worked so hard to, and like at some points you had to either hide, or if you embraced, you were like shunned for it.
Yeah.
I remember I never really had a huge problem with it, but I remember my brother and his friends growing up would tease me about reading my comics and
Right.
stuff and watching weird shows, and like he'd be like, "You're such a nerd, you're not gonna be cool." Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, whatever. I'm 11.
Yeah.
But and then like once I reached high school, it wasn't something that I really hid, but it wasn't something I really flaunted either. It wasn't central to my
Right.
character, but a lot of people really had to hide it, and I kind of can relate to it, and because I hid that I liked anime. I still kind of hide it. Anime's still on the table.
Yeah,
Anime's
such
still
a
out
weird
there.
thing.
But with everything else, I didn't really hide it, but I wasn't very vocal about it, so I never thought of it as a problem. But a lot of people were really shunned and teased and made fun of for it, and I think they came together for that. Like, a great show that exemplifies that is Freaks and Geeks.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which is just, the horrible social pariahs coming together and like bonding and find something real in this thing that they were shunned for.
Yeah. And now the general public is encroaching on their
Yeah, and now it's just something that
on
was
what they've earned
special
basically,
to
as
them.
being outcasts.
Yeah, and whether that is right or wrong is still up in the air, and I genuinely don't think we can come to a conclusion on that because I don't think there
Oh, we're not
is a
here
right
to
or wrong.
prove anything.
Yeah, no, we're just here to talk. Yeah,
Hey guys, by the end of this podcast, we're
we'll
gonna
have solved it.
We'll solve the issue.
I think there's also that whole like you have one thing. Do you know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about? Like,
Oh, I do.
it's you have those people who are like, oh, I'm a Whovian, and then beyond that, like there's
Pick the
no
worst one.
why. I like the word is fun.
No, it's one of the most relevant ones.
But yeah,
I
it's
think.
one of the most relevant ones where it's like
We
they're
could
only
also talk about
identified.
Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Sorry.
They're only identified by that one thing at that point. Like,
Right.
yeah, you can be really into Doctor Who, but you also probably have a lot of other likes. Like, you might like
Knitting.
knitting.
Yeah.
No, and like even
Knitting's
stuff
fun.
even stuff within the bracket of nerd culture. Yeah,
but
like
your biggest thing is Doctor Who. Like, yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
So, but there's that whole way of like people push people into like, oh, you have to be most outspoken about that one thing,
Yeah.
right?
Well, here's the thing. People, they're kind of like onions.
Are you gonna give us?
Oh,
the
gonna
onion
sound
template?
like
They have layers, guys.
Well, there's the Shrek joke for the day.
No.
Oh, I mean, nothing better to go on out on than a Shrek joke, right?
Yeah. So, I think people should just remember there's onion layers to everybody, and just let them show them.
Let them peel themselves back.
Yeah. Just remember, they're not one big whole sour thing, oniony thing.
We didn't make you listen to us. You chose to listen to us.